Welcome to the Design Systems Podcast. We're all about the places where design and development overlap. We talk with the industry experts about trends in design, development, and take a look at new ways to build digital experiences, typically over a beer or two. Today, I'm talking with Morgane Peng. She's the design director at Societe Generale. She works in corporate investment banking. Her focus is on scaling design and tying it into the fabric of how that part of the business works. She's also an indie video game developer. And I'm really excited to talk to you because you've probably created one of the most inspiring Medium series I've read about the design system journey that you guys have undertaken. So welcome. Very excited to have you on.
Oh, hi, Chris. That means a lot. Thanks for having me. Some strong praise.
Yeah, it's well, we got a chance to meet first at Clarity back in, was that 2018 already? Holy cow.
Last year, no?
Oh, was it last year? I guess, yeah, 2019?
Yes, it was.
So when we had it in San Francisco, we met on the rooftop at the Figma event that was there.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, well...
That seems like a different time, right?
Oh, certainly, yeah. It's a crazy world right now, that's for sure. Well, we got a chance to chat a little bit while we were there, and I know that working in the financial services sector for a large banking institution, there's a lot of kind of interesting ways that design systems have sort of impacted the whole like financial fintech space, largely because there's lots of needs for things like compliance, lots of needs for things like standardization. But what I really am kind of curious to understand is this journey that you guys have gone through. I think one of your pieces was titled something like the last 5 years of design systems. How did you arrive at this kind of process for building a design system and building software, and what did that journey kind of look like?
Well, it's been quite a journey. I think I can say that we basically went from zero design mindset. At that time, people would be like, designers in the bank? What a crazy idea, right? To having today the mandate of ensuring that we design consistency and that everything is consistent across our platform, which is called HG Markets. And this is like basically the B2B suite of services of Societe Generale, or SocGen for short the name. Mm. This is on top of what we do and where we work with projects at a local level to ensure that the experience is great. I guess I can try to pinpoint 3 moments that really made this shift happen. So first, we realized quite early on that we had to go web. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know that today sounds like a common sense, right? But like if you think 8 years, 10 years ago, we had a lot of what we call fat clients. So things done in WPF, or even like very old things such as COBOL. I don't even know if you know COBOL.
Yeah. I've back in my computer engineering days, I actually wrote a COBOL application at one point. I'm sure it's on like some old hard drive gathering dust somewhere in my house. Given what COBOL programmers are being paid in the US right now, it might be worth dusting that thing off. I don't know.
Well, yeah, maybe legacy systems, right? Back then, web really was for like marketing, maybe communication, websites. Like it wasn't really for like serious, software, like banking software that needed to be installed and deployed. And well, when this occurred, we realized that we had to go web. Suddenly, we started to benefit from everything that the web brings to you, such as, having decoupling front and back development, taking care of the experience, having responsive websites. All of this really happened thanks to this.
So there's like this big shift, and like you said, maybe 8 years ago, where you guys had a bunch of desktop applications and a bunch of like these legacy systems that probably didn't live up to the consumer design standards that we have now for things like, iPhone apps and all that other sort of stuff. And so you guys kind of faced like this dual thing where there was this idea of like, how do we respond to the consumerization of enterprise tech, like making it so that design actually matters for enterprise technology. And then secondly, taking all these things that were traditionally done on desktop clients and bringing them to the web.
Yeah, I mean, we still have desktop clients, right? It takes time to change everything, but what's for sure is like everything must be web first now. And this really allows us to, work on the back end side, like the APIs on one side, and really care about the front end on the other side. I don't know if this is going too much into details, but this is also what allows us to maybe have multiple front end sides with the same back end side because it makes sense for the users. things that we couldn't really do back in the days.
Right. Like the promise of microservices was always the idea that you'd be able to tie all of your back-end data and sort of like remix it however you wanted in the front-end experience. And, I think that there's been a lot of push towards that, especially in, these consumer-driven, traditionally, how do I put this delicately, laggards in the industry in terms of tech, where, you had healthcare, finance, insurance, all trying to build these consumer applications that were a lot more microservice oriented, just so that you could actually say like, what do my users need across all of these different contexts that I interact with them in the business.
Yeah. And actually, this is funny because it led us to a second moment where basically we realized that design, UX, whatever you want to call it, had to move out of IT. Because the more we built on the web, the more we realized that at some point, the things we'll give to clients and the thing we use would be the same. Especially in B2B, we're not talking about consumer-facing apps. Like, we're really talking about like business professionals. And the way that they behave is very similar to a trader at Societe Generale and a trader in another company would probably behave the same way. Most of them, they're the same people who circulates around, like kind of for the devs and the designers. So in terms of usage, it wasn't really making sense to have like one thing just for the internal users and something for the external user. Well, the usage were the same. And that really led us to put design actually on the business side, because the same way that we invest so much on our salespeople, so they can talk to the same voice, present the company consistently. Well, we had to face the same thing, but on the digital space, to have like all our website talking and our services talking with the same voice, if I can have this analogy.
Yeah, no, the consistency, I think, is, a huge goal, right?
Yeah. Well, today, at least when we say that we do design-led projects, we really have this trio where we have someone from the business who knows the users, makes the final call, understand, the strategy, drives it. We have someone from IT who knows the system, because again, I can do the best design, but if there's no API behind, I'll just like be an empty shell, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have design, and our job, and the job of my team is to make sure that first the experience is good, but also that we don't reinvent the wheel. And very often we put people in touch. And of course, a design system is really like a tool to kind of build this more systemic approach.
Yeah, no, I think the cross-functional nature of that is really kind of the magic there, right? Like this ability to have people that understand the requirements, people that understand the technology, and people that understand how to build the experience all in the same place, all talking about what that experience should be, with an eye towards like how it can be built based on other experiences you guys already have.
Yeah, and I guess this leads to the last moment. So it's funny they arrived in the right order as well in time, is we realized that business complexity is not the same as interface complexity. What I mean by that is, in B2B, we have a lot of complexity, complicated screen. And back in the days, I remember it was a kind of a point of pride. People having like multiple screens, like crazy buttons, like things like ticking there and there. Even for me, because I actually started on the business side to understand that. So for sure, the business is complex, right? But still, there was a lot of complexity added by the interface that was really not optimized for like a human use. It was like perfect for the system, but not for the users. And this ability to say that, okay, the business is complex, and maybe if we're talking about financing, I don't know, a bridge, you're the expert, you know best. Mm-hmm. But really, the people who are going to use the services to, interact and, work with you to finance that bridge, you don't know how they behave. You don't know, the user journey. Like, there's things we need to study. And having this split business interface was really what kind of drove us. And I guess today our bread and butter is really, we try to design the right level of complexity for business with the simplest interface.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome goal. And I think that is that baked into your guys' principles that you guys talk about, like that interface simplicity?
Yes. So a team motto is kind of, is actually rethink complexity. what we try to have is like actually one of our principles in the design system. It's funny because we still, we haven't finished kind of defining the final wording, but it's really this idea that we want the right level of complexity for the right people.
That's really interesting. See, I used to right out of college, I worked on a lot of healthcare applications and accounting applications. And that was one of the things that there was always a real challenge to me, right? Is I felt like the majority of my job was taking these incredibly complex interfaces about patient data, about accounting system data, about inventory management systems, and really just translating those into simpler screens for people in everyday use. And like that was my entire life for 3 years, was basically doing that kind of work. And I always thought, like in the back of my mind, if the app was just made, like if there were just fewer fields, right? If there was like either a way to automate some of that data collection or just expose what people needed at that particular moment, that would make a lot more powerful experience. And maybe my job wouldn't even be necessary.
Okay, I have a good one on this. So most of the time, designers, they know design tools, right? Mm-hmm. They are design professionals. And a lot of time we have a lot of forms, especially candidates, when they see that, their first reaction is like, wow, too many fields. We need to cut all this, put that into steppers, like have this kind of progressive disclosure thing. Then what I would say is, okay, when you use a design software, how would you feel if every time you want to change a paragraph, a text, or whatever, you have like this stepper, right, like a progressive disclosure, to go through every single step to make sure that you understand that you want to change like the font size or the style or whatever? How would you feel?
Yeah, it's painful.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's it, right? So, I guess like we've been very, of course, because most of the time what we say is all those consumer apps, and for sure they need to be easy to use and have this progressive disclosure, because most of the time we're not experts. But when you design for experts and for advanced professional, you really have to do this user research, understand their context. Otherwise, you're kind of actually designing something they cannot use.
Mm-hmm. Because it feels like the experience is getting in the way of the function instead of like really enabling people to, either parse the information the right way and walk through things, like be led down a path, versus having a really clear understanding of where they want to be and just wanting to get there as quickly as possible.
Yeah. As I say, as I usually say, if I have to do my taxes, I want progressive disclosure, please. Like, I want step by step. Please let me know every step, explain what it is that you want and what I should put in that, field. But I'm pretty sure that a tax expert or like someone who works at, the government, they know that by heart. It's their job to know how it works, right? So they wouldn't need the same interface as me.
No, that's a really interesting, thought about context, right? And especially in the area that you work, where there is like a profession built around banking, and the other side of that being like a bunch of people that are maybe still like smart people and information savvy, but don't have the same background in banking.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, we have all this range of customers, right? We have at one extreme that are really professional. They're at the same level as our internal staff. And then you may have like someone who's running a small company who needs to do some cash management. Of course, they won't need the same services, and then they don't even need the same products in terms of financial products than those very advanced people. And as I actually said previously, the fact that now we have APIs kind of empowers us to bring different digital products to those different needs.
So where does the design system sort of fit into that, right? So if you have all these different experiences that you're building across like this broad array of contexts, how does the design system really empower you guys as a company to make those awesome experiences?
That is actually one of the lessons that we had on design system is first at the beginning we wanted to do something we wanted to do something like Google almost. So I know it's a cliche, but it had to be simple, every big form, etc. And little by little, the more we had feedbacks, the more we realized that no, like some of our interfaces, they will be having smaller inputs and lots of numbers, on the screens. And we realized that, we're not doing a design system to do a design system. It needs to answer a problem. Our problem is the fact that we have to design sometimes very simple experiences and sometimes very complex experiences, and hopefully everything with the same design system. And for a while, and again, if you think like 5 years ago, we were not sure that actually one single design system could do all this, especially because like you really have to think there's like, on one side, there's like a simple screen, almost like, what you expect for a neobank, like Revolut. And on the other side, you have something which is filled with numbers. Actually, like there's some screenshots I can send you, or like you can link to the podcast so people can appreciate the range.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll throw it in the show notes.
Cool. And people were like, we can't have the same, and like we don't want to have the same, it will be bad for the performances, etc., etc. So it took us a while to even convince people that it was doable.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. 5 years ago was about the time that I started first working on design systems, and really even first heard the words design systems kind of describing what this is, right? Like when we were all sort of getting started on the design systems front, we called it like component driven development. We called it like modular systems for design. We call it all these other different things, but like nobody actually really knew what we were building at the time. And so it's interesting to hear, you guys basically sitting down and saying like, we need this systematic approach. We need to plan this across this broad variety of contexts. And we also need it to be like, our own. And can it even do all this? I could imagine asking myself that question as well 5 years ago.
So we weren't really saying design system. I don't think that was actually, I don't know when this word started to become widely used. We used to call it a web toolkit.
Yeah.
But actually, we still actually are, because I realized that web toolkit, everyone in the organization understands what that is. A web toolkit, makes sense. Whereas design system, sometimes people like design and system. So is that IT? Is that design? Are you going to paint something? So we still actually mentioned, basically we just use whatever people need to hear so they understand the concept.
Yeah, I mean, naming is hard, but whoever coined the term design system for like what it is that we talk about when we talk about these like systematic approaches to design and development, like having the word design baked into it has not done us any favors as an industry in understanding like just like the truly cross-functional nature of a design system.
Yeah, because then I have to explain that actually it's also code.
Right, exactly.
Like, oh, okay, so it's a web toolkit. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's just use web toolkit. But yeah, so basically that's kind of our playground, really, to have that many screens to do that can be so different. And for me, that's actually the reason why it was relatively easy, I guess, if I can see, people struggling with the idea of selling a design system. That for us, we have so many projects, so many screens. And at some point, people just realize that we are reinventing the wheel, having multiple buttons, like way of closing a model. So it was just like logical to do it. I'm not saying that, people will always buy into the idea. I think most of the time it's more like, how do you do it how do you build that into the organization? But the fact that, at that point, we had this idea that we need to go to web, that design was on the business end. I mean, it was separate from IT. And also that, not everything needs to be done the same way in terms of design complexity. I think that really helped.
That's awesome. And so you touched on this just a second ago, like how do you integrate these ideas into the way the business thinks, right? So there's a culture aspect to this. And, a big part of your job you mentioned is trying to sort of spread that culture and bake design into the fabric of the business. And so how has that evolved as the organization you're with has adopted design systems, as your own views on design systems have changed? How have you gone from 5 years ago thinking about how to bake design into your culture to today?
So 5 years ago, I was like, okay, let's do this project. Then when it's over, we can focus on building services. Yeah, that was 5 years ago. Because when we released it, first, I knew we would have some feedback from projects. So we took them into account and we did some, releases. And then people started to have more requests. Legitimate requests. For example, I remember people were starting to say, okay, we need a dark theme because when I display so many figures all day long, my eyes hurt. And so we started to work on the dark theme. Then when that was released, I remember there was a big fight back then between Angular and React.
Right.
we all know how this turns out.
Back then, there's probably still a fight happening now.
Yeah, but actually, like I remember, like 4 years ago, everything was about Angular, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we started to have a few projects that were like, no, we are going to use React. It's better for whatever we do. And then we were like, okay, all right. So now we need to make it agnostic. So we actually have many white apps. We have Angular white app, we have React white apps, we have Vue.js, and we have vanilla as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the web components, of course. But that's all happens, like kind of consequently. And so when that was done, then we realized that, design standards had changed, that we had to revamp this. So we revamped it with like some of the services that were kind of early birds on the revamp. So we released a new design system. And when that happened, well, it was still not over because we changed our design tools. So suddenly we had to change the design kit. And I think the biggest release up to date is what we did at the beginning of the year. We released what we call adaptive color.
I'm definitely curious to hear a take on this because I haven't actually talked to anybody about this being baked into a design system yet.
Maybe I should share my screen, but it's a podcast, so too bad. But if we do write some stuff on Medium, again, I'll give you the link. What happens with our design system, okay? We have single experiences, complex experiences, and with those complex experiences, they need several layers of depth. Mm-hmm. So we have different levels of backgrounds, so we can do a good composition. Problem is that the color we define, when you change the background, and I mean, it's not gray, but it's levels of gray almost, well, the contrast is gonna become very bad, mm-hmm. and at some point it won't be accessible at all. And so we started to have this problem and clients complaining that prices were not easy to see. And we kind of had to come to the conclusion that we had to change the colors. And so today, and we haven't actually computed that number, but we have combinations. So all the colors adapt depending on which level they are, and depending as well on the themes, because we have the standard theme and then we have the dark theme. Mm-hmm. And that took us, I think, months of work. So congrats to the team for doing that. And so it's kind of funny because the way that we design today in a design tool is not high fidelity anymore, because the end product, depending on the level, is, the high fidelity.
Right. That's an awesome statement right there. The idea that your traditional design tool, like your Figma, your Sketch, etc., has become a lo-fi tool for you because you can't actually like attack that level of fidelity until you get it in the medium that it's destined for.
Yeah, I mean, if we were playing silly, we could, but honestly, having to understand which level, which variation have this kind of, we could build some kind of tool to give us the right color variation, but I think people would just become crazy.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of tackling accessibility too. Like the idea of adaptive color and literally having, your color pairs and your contrast ratios change depending on where a user is at in the application. I think that, trying to frame out all those contexts for an app inside of a traditional vector-based tool, you would end up with thousands of screens probably.
Yeah, and as well, all the regression and the checks, right? We actually do a test with CSS just to make sure that all the colors are correct. But when we did it, it was because of feedback, right? I don't think that all design systems need adaptive color. If you don't have many levels of backgrounds, you're fine. But for us, we had to, especially for the services that have a lot of data in there. Mm-hmm. And then it's only at the end where we finished it, we were like, hold on, how are we gonna do for design, right? Design tools, because we're not gonna change all the variations. I don't even know how many there are. And so people were worried. And we finally said, okay, whatever we produce in design is an artifact. And what matters is the specs we give to the developers.
Yeah, I honestly believe that that's the direction that we're all headed. I mean, not right away and maybe not even in the short term, but I feel like as our ability to realize that in a lot of ways, design tools actually limit our ability to express in ways that the web enables us to express ourselves, people are going to move further and further away from traditional high fidelity designs inside of design tools to basically trying to say like, let me sketch this out. Let me experiment. Let me prototype. Let me, pick a direction based on my tool, but for me to actually understand what that experience is going to look like, it has to be in the browser.
Yeah. You're so right on this. We actually said that we kind of now design in the browser because even to be able to do this, we couldn't really use a traditional design tool to implement those colors because, again, it was so complex just to see if it works, and we had to see the rendering in the web. And so to do that, and I guess everything comes like naturally because that tool existed before, but without that tool, I have no idea how we would have implemented that. But we kind of built something that bridges, design and development. We call it the playground, which is basically like a sandbox where you have all our components. So me as a designer, if I don't know how to code, I would just go drag and drop components, change a few parameters, and then, compose the page. And developers, they will go directly and type everything with all their crazy shortcuts. Mm-hmm. I'm very impressed every time I say. But the idea is it's the same tool for everyone. And so whenever we have some questions about some specs of behavior, we always use the playground because this is, it is running the live version of a design system. Mm-hmm. So we know that this is the golden source.
Gotcha. And it's this place where everybody cross-functionally, doesn't matter what your discipline is, can actually work in the same spot.
Yeah. And funny thing, but again, I don't know if you heard the word emergent games. Mm-hmm. It's like when you build a system and you keep it open and then you see what players will do with it. I guess it's kind of happening now with this tool because first it was for designers and developers to work better. But like recently we've seen some POs playing with it, like product side, right? Mm-hmm. Product owners. And I like to share this example because I think it's very cute and funny. One day I had someone that I think works on communication websites or something who asked me about a font, whether, would support, different characters because we have different branches in different countries and they use different alphabets. And of course I knew that because we did that work, right? I knew that it works, but I just coded him a little playground and say, hey, look, have a look. It works. All the language you requested. There's no problem with the C's. There's no problem with Japanese, Chinese, blah, blah, blah. Have a look and you can play it with you if you want. When I sent this email, I had no hope that he would actually do something. Right. But he replied to me and said, oh, yeah, look, Morgane. Of course, it works wonderfully. And I've made 2 links. And I opened the first one, which is basically him copy-pasting a bunch of like text. Mm-hmm. And I opened the second link, which is basically him copy-pasting a lot of emojis, just to make sure that they were compatible with the design system.
That's awesome.
It's like, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to screen grab that because this is awesome. Because again, I didn't ask him, I didn't force him to do that, but he did it on his own, kind of like a game. And when people start playing with things, testing, iterating, this is where, we are kind of infusing design. Because on the side, he had all the components. So the next step he did is like he tried to grab a few components and play with that. And like little by little, this, I hope this is how we are infusing design.
That's awesome. Like the idea, I love the relationship to emergent gaming. And I also love that, you guys have, with the playground, created a sandbox space for really anyone to, play. I think that's such an important part of the, infusion of design. The characteristic of it all is that you give people a place where they can experiment, where they can play, where they can like really touch and get tactile with things. And I think that that's usually intimidating, right? Like if you think about the traditional ideas of software development or the creative process, right? You tell somebody like, hey, go open up, Figma or whatever. And like, if you have never used Figma before, that can be an intimidating process. Or like, hey, go open up a code editor, right? Like that's also a really intimidating process. But if you have this place where people that are non-technical or not a member of that individual discipline can go and experiment and play, it opens up this whole different idea. And I guess like by idea, I mean, the people that are closest to the problem can feel like they can solve it themselves.
Yeah. And even when you want to sell your design system, because again, when you ask projects to use it, then to use it, they have to install it, they have to look at the packages, they have to find it. And even if you're a dev, you have to install everything. I mean, it's like painful, right? And it's a bit like if you go, I mean, it's a joke that our lead designer, developer makes a lot, but it's so true. So hi, Fabien, if you hear us. It's a bit like if you go to, if you go in a shop and you're not sure which, I don't know, fridge you want, which oven you want, but you start reading all the documentation, and people actually ask you to read the documentation and then make your mind. I mean, nobody does that. You only make your mind when you can test, play with it, have this trial. I mean, everyone does trial, so why not design systems?
No, that's great. I think that's a really a good analogy. But bringing it back around to games and talking about emergent gaming, like I know you're a game developer yourself. What lessons from game development did you end up applying to design systems? We kind of hit on this before the show, and I thought it was a really interesting analogy.
I know it's sometimes a drama on Twitter, but can I talk about creativity and design systems?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. You know, the same way that some people who don't believe in design system are like, oh, I can't be creative with a design system. Well, you know that in games, they have something they call GDD, which is Game Design Document, which is basically somewhere that explains how items work, like what kind of action, what are the outcomes, so that it's predictable. And the same way that, in a game, you don't want suddenly your game to change because it's been done by a different team. Or like if you watch YouTube, you can see like this very famous guy, the angry video game nerd, who plays all games where they lacked completely consistency. Like on one level, you can jump on the platform, but on the next level, it's part of the background. So you feel you jump on it, but then you die.
Right.
So if it's just because, you wanted to be creative, no, that doesn't serve the purpose of the game or the gaming experience. You can change things, but they need to add to the gaming experience. For example, changing the gravity. In Mario Odyssey, there's a stage where you're on the moon, so it's very fun because you can jump around and fly. But like if on every stage is different, that would be very frustrating. And the same way that I don't think, we say that, games are not creative. They kind of use a design system to be built, like with all the actions, like documentations, how the players interact with the gaming elements. So yeah, I think that when I had those first questions about creativity, I thought about that, and I was like, no, it's part of you using assets to create the best experience. If the experience makes sense to have like some kind of customized elements, but it makes sense, it brings to the experience, yeah, we can do it. But if not, there's no reason, like in games.
Definitely. And I know you said you had really started building indie games in Flash, and kind of this idea that Flash was this really interesting medium at the time, and like it's not around that much anymore. But I think that the experience you took from that was really fascinating. You were talking about the ability to do all of the different disciplines inside of the same medium and how valuable that was.
Yeah. Back in the days, really you have your design softwares on one side, and then you have the code editors on the other side, and then Flash or Micromedia. What was the former name? It was like another name before.
Wasn't it Macromedia Flash or something? I don't know.
Yeah,
it's been a bit
before it was acquired by Adobe, right? And that arrived where you can combine design and code in a single like environment. And this is why I was like really attracted to that. So I don't know why, if there's a link with my job today, but when I started discovering Flash and realized that I could actually both design and draw and do games at the same time. And actually, this is how I started, as creating like small indie games, but really they were like small, dress-up games, like snake games, etc. But again, you could do everything in the same place, and there was not this silo that, we keep adding silos in everything in the chain. So this is why I love Flash so much.
Awesome. Yeah, it's kind of cool to see the parallels there, right? We always talk about how games show us what's possible inside of technology. And I think that the relationship between the idea of every game has a set of rules to follow, And every digital product that we build for a company also should have a set of rules to follow. And it should always be about making it the best experience possible, because games with great experiences are the games that are fun to play. Much like how, business apps with great experiences are the apps that are the best to use. So I think it's interesting to see kind of like this idea of gaming technology once again showing us like what the right direction is for people, because I think that when you build something that is inherently supposed to be enjoyable, then showcasing like a similar way of applying that knowledge to business apps makes those things a lot more enjoyable to use too.
Yeah, and if people have time, I really recommend looking at those videos of people playing old school games, because they made all the mistakes that sometimes we're making today on the web, such as I was saying about consistency, right? Having different gaming elements behave differently on different levels. Today, in a real game, like it would be a no-no, right? Everyone knows that it needs to be consistent. But back then, like 20 years ago, it wasn't really clear. The same way that, in a game menu, you want things to behave the same way. You don't want now suddenly to, I don't know, have a drop down somewhere and then having a completely different interaction somewhere else. And that also happened in games. So I feel like all those mistakes have been done before. So it's kind of funny to see the parallel here, because web, it's true, is kind of like more recent, right?
Yeah. Have you ever played the game Evoland?
No. What's this one?
So one of the really interesting things about it is it's a game where as you progress in the game, it also like progresses the style of the game as well, right? So it starts like old school, like, 2D Zelda style. And then by the end of it, it's like fully 3D rendered and you're running around in a 3D environment.
Oh, I think I've heard about this one. Okay. Yeah, I want to try it. Yeah.
You basically unlock these things as you go through the game. And one of the things that I love most about it stylistically is that the menu changes and the interaction model changes dramatically as you unlock these different things. So like, you remember the old like JRPG style like Final Fantasy games like back in the day, right?
Yeah.
Like how everything was like menus inside of menus inside of menus. Yeah. So you start with that paradigm inside of this game where it's like menus inside of menus, and by the end of it you have like contextual wheels and all this other stuff like that is a part of how you interact. And I thought that was really cool that they didn't just evolve the gameplay. They evolved like the interaction model with the game as well. I thought that was a really interesting touch.
Yeah, super cool. I've heard of it, but I guess now I have time. I should definitely try it.
Yeah, maybe a good quarantine game in between Animal Crossing.
Yeah. I need to cut down on that too.
Well, awesome. Thanks so much for being on today. This has been a great conversation. I really love what you had to say about how, your own thinking has evolved and how you've tried to go from this idea of hey, we're going to sit down and do a design systems project, or you didn't even really call it that at that time, and now have like this wonderful, incredible experience for your users that is its own sort of product as a result. I think that's just an awesome journey, and I really appreciate you taking the time to chat about it.
Thanks for having me.
This pod, as always, is brought to you by Knapsack. You can check us out at knapsack.cloud or at knapsackcloud on Twitter. Have a great day. That's all for today. We'd love to hear from you with questions, ideas for new episodes, beer recommendations, or comments. You can find us on Twitter at the DS Pod. Cheers, and thanks for listening to the Design Systems Podcast.